A 7-year-old, once dubbed the boy with no brain, has shown remarkable progress after undergoing pioneering treatment. Noah Wall, who was born with spina bifida and only 2% of his brain, was not expected to survive for more than a few days, and doctors had advised his parents to consider an abortion. But his brain has now grown to a remarkable 80% of what it should be, leaving medics stunned. He is now undergoing therapy in the hope he might one day walk.
Because I had 2% of my brain.
Wow, so you're doing wonderfully well.
Yeah, and then it grew to 80%.
Right.
Considering obviously what we were told when Noah obviously was in the womb and that he had spina bifida, and the fact that, you know, he'd be paralysed from the chest and that he'd never be able to walk.
Scans show that this little boy was born with just 2% of his brain.
That's my brain.
He's astounded doctors.
He has surprised us, you know, through his life so far. He's completely remarkable.
You are one amazing kid, you are.
And astonished his parents.
How he was doing the things he could do with such a small amount of brain, I don't think I'll ever understand it.
I love you.
He's a complete miracle.
Before he was even born, doctors predicted Noah would be severely brain damaged and was unlikely to survive.
I've never seen a baby's coffin before.
It was like being hit with a baseball bat. You know, this is our child's brain.
But somehow Noah defied all the odds. And his family have worked tirelessly on developing Noah's brain.
And I wanted to make sure that he was making use of the best of what he got.
Then something even more baffling was to happen.
Look, his brain has grown. And we had one picture of the little bit on one side. We had this great big brain on the other.
Just everyone was just hugging each other, really, because it was just so extraordinary.
Noah's brain had grown, which it's not supposed to do.
I don't believe it.
Noah was defying medical understanding.
Every time we see the doctors, they just shake their head. They're just amazed at what he can do.
Leading specialists to question how our brains really work after all.
Seeing those scans is a kind of a wake-up call. Noah's case is a message of hope for anyone with a brain injury.
I think he teaches the medical profession that you can't ever know.
What are we going to teach other doctors? Can we learn anything from you, Noah?
Yeah.
As a result of a cephalic disorder, Noah was born with an estimated 2% of his brain, the signature of a condition referred to as hydroencephaly. But despite this incredible cortical deficit, it's no exaggeration to say that Noah has functioned and responded relatively normal to his environment since birth. The other incredible feature of Noah's journey through life is that his brain actually regrew to 80% of normal size by age 3. Whereas it is commonly accepted that the number of neurons you are born with are pretty much all you'll ever have. So we would regard this as an unprecedented isolated case. We also have the honour of having Noah and his parents Shelley and Rob being with us today. They've made the trip over to the conference to meet everyone and to answer any questions you may have at the break. The family is certainly willing to explore any research opportunities if there's any interest in this from members of this conference. I became more and more fascinated with Noah when I first met him and his mum on Skype, and was stunned to learn that given that there was an incredible number of media releases and documentaries about Noah since his miraculous survival at birth, no one in the field had studied him since birth and closely monitored the regrowth of his brain. So tragically, we don't have any of these data for this presentation. I liken this a little bit like if we knew nothing about space travel but saw images of people walking on the moon and had no information as to how they got there. So we have to creatively hypothesise on the most logical rationale to explain this based upon the knowledge we do have. Noah's parents, Shelley and Rob, were given no hope that Noah would survive at birth and that they should prepare his funeral. However, the attending medical staff were shocked when Noah responded normally at birth, crying, sucking and displaying normal bodily movements. This is, however, not uncommon, as all babies initially respond from their brain stems at birth until their cortex settles and begins to make sense of the world. Hence, all babies are referred to as brain stem beings. However, within a few weeks, infants with hydrocephaly will begin to display symptoms. Generally, after several months post-birth, more traumatising signs and symptoms such as seizures may emerge, and the infant may develop hydrocephalus as this was not already present at birth. Intellectual deficits, impaired growth, paralysis, sensory motor impairments, poor thermoregulation, respiratory problems may also emerge over time. However, biology is messy and entropy is everywhere, and molecular driving forces produce nonlinear effects. There is notably a lot of variability in signs and symptoms from one of these cases to the next. Symptoms and quality of life seem to vary enormously, and that is, there's no linear effects relative to the degree of hydrocephaly between one infant and the next. The existing medical paradigm suggests that an infant born with only 2% of their brain would not survive long term without artificial intervention or without at least acute monitoring, care and support, and would be severely disabled physically and mentally during the supported lifespan of that individual. It is anticipated that there would be no further increases towards normal brain topology, and that at birth the infant basically has all the neurons it will ever have. Up until now, it's been a standard observation that severely diminished brain size at birth does not increase in topological percentage towards normal brain topology post-birth. Historically, these standard observations and prognosis have held up and are supported by such cases where children have been born with approximately 20% of their brains. Typically, in these cases, the topological percentage of normal brain topology did not alter, and as predicted, the heads of these children are notably small and they are significantly physically and mentally disabled and fully dependent. The existing paradigm also suggests that at least 80% of the full adult brain and corresponding neurocorrelates are required for the individual to become fully conscious. So here we are hypothesising the central nervous system's genius to trigger and self-organise to higher states of complexity, as epitomised in the case of Noah, the boy born with only 2% of his brain. I will at least attempt to hypothesise on how these incredible events might have unfolded, and were enabled by referencing other natural phenomena observed in the natural world as metaphors, analogies or equivalences. This is not to suggest that this is what Noah's brain actually did. I'm simply identifying the likeliness to other natural occurring phenomena. You can see some images on the right there of Noah at various stages of his development, and there's a whole library of videos dedicated to Noah's journey from birth on YouTube. So the big questions remain. How or why was Noah able to respond normally from day one without a fully developed cortex and cerebellum? Even at age 3, the scans of Noah's brain exhibited a significantly underdeveloped occipital lobe, temporal lobe and cerebellum. Yet he was able to see, hear and display normal behavioural and motor responses and demonstrate normal emotional responses to emotionally arousing environmental stimuli, with what appeared to be a significant compromised thalamus and limbic system. The second obvious question is, what inspired Noah's brain to begin to regrow and to grow to where it is today, and why was this necessary if he was seemingly doing just as well without it? So in addressing how or why Noah could respond to the environment quite normally in advance of the emergence of and the development of regions of the brain deemed vital for normal functions and behaviours. From when I very first became aware of Noah and from conversations I was having with his mother Shelley, who had told me of all the things Noah was able to do within the first 12 months of his life against the odds, my immediate thoughts were, here's one of the greatest arguments for fractal phenomena in physiology and yet challenges at the same time. It seemed to me that the only explanation here was that each neuron within the remaining 2% of Noah's brain at some fractal scale must have been able to exhibit all of the behaviours and do all of the jobs the brain has to do, and it was only through a series of phase transitions over time that neurons began to differentiate into specific and or combinational roles, and the brain progressively regrew towards 80%. So surely regrowth of the brain is not a self-activating process, or else it would be observed all of the time. If we look through the lens of DNA, we have to complement each and every remaining neuron present in Noah's brain at birth for all working together to orchestrate this unprecedented regrowth. However, there needed to be the right forms of environmental signals to inspire this process. For example, a pine cone decorating a coffee table has all the potential to become a magnificent pine tree in accordance to its encoded DNA, but will always remain a pine cone in this environment. When it is exposed to the right environmental stimuli and stresses such as soil, sun, heat and rain, the picture of the pine tree encoded in its DNA will begin to emerge. So what then were the contributing factors that inspired the unprecedented regrowth of Noah's brain towards normal size? Classic nature versus nurture debates will possibly go on forever. However, we simply have a relative problem to solve here that we would like to form some logical opinions on. We know that Noah's innate system has the recipe of a normal human being encoded within his DNA. But we know from many studies performed on severely abused and neglected children that normal physical and emotional growth can be severely inhibited. So if a rule is that a loving, supportive environment stimulates and contributes to normal growth and behaviour, then it is known that Noah was surrounded by lots of love, care and nurturing. We can draw from this that these are some of the factors that may have contributed to and supported the emergence of normal behaviours encoded in his DNA, even in the absence of large proportions of the brain, and as well inspired the abstract version of the whole brain to emerge from the existing seeds which were the 2% of the brain Noah was born with. There are many intertwined innate factors to consider. However, the question might be, why does this not commonly occur in other children born with only a small percentage of their brains? What was different about Noah's environment that established initial conditions for regrowth? We know Noah was nested in a highly supportive and loving environment, as mentioned earlier. However, this is required for the healthy mental and physical development of any child. We cannot say that other children with similar physical restraints are less loved and supported and therefore they did not regrow or grow a normal brain post-birth. So in order to express this phenomenon of Noah's brain's regrowth, we may just have to settle on the simple overarching theme here, which is when given the right sets of initial conditions, natural order enables lesion systems to self-organise to higher states of complexity and to be able to mirror previously states of complexity. And that is during environmentally fertile times, regardless of whatever that means to any particular system, living system, natural order enables the system to self-organise to reach its optimum evolutionary potential.